Hello viewers, this is Not Too Fast here. If you own a 2021 and newer Nissan Rogue, depending on the trim of the vehicle you have, most likely it does not have a 12-volt accessory outlet in the back hatch. Now there is a 12-volt outlet at the front center console, but if you have any accessories that run on 12-volt like a portable refrigerator, you cannot power it at the back. And this is a huge inconvenience. So in this video I'm going to show you how I'm going to go about installing my own 12-volt accessory outlet, and the installation is actually not too difficult. So let's get started. The interesting thing is if you look in your back hatch, on the driver's side, there's actually a cutout for the 12-volt accessory plug. But because this is a lower trim, Nissan decided to cut costs and not put one in here. I'm going to install the outlet in this factory hole and run my own power wire from the front fuse box all the way to the back. First thing I'll do is remove this cover you see right here. Use a screwdriver and just pop this off. And here's a look at this blank cover. To get the ignition 12 volt that we need, I'm going to tap one of the fuse in the fuse panel. On the driver's side, remove this fuse panel cover. On the back of this cover, there's a sticker showing you which fuse is for what. On the right side, you see there's a power socket fuse, 20 amp. Now this one here is for the front 12 volt accessory port. Below that, there's another power socket 20 amp. This one is the one for the back, but if you look on the fuse box, right here, this is that fuse slot, and it's empty right now. I'll use my multimeter to test it and make sure it's ignition 12 volt. Right here is my multimeter. I'm going to probe the left side of that fuse slot, and you see 0 volt. Now turn on the ignition. Right here is my multimeter. I'm going to probe the left side of that fuse slot. That's where the voltage should be coming in, and you see it's 0 volt. Now I'm going to turn on the ignition. Now probe that same side, and you see it's 12 volt. So this will provide the 12 volt I need for the 12 volt outlet. Here's a look at the fuse tap that I'll be installing. Now this type of fuse is called Micro2, and that's the style of fuse this car uses. Now the way this fuse tap works is the voltage will come in on the left side here. It'll go through the fuse and come out on this wire. The top slot is for your accessory, and the bottom slot is for the factory fuse. So here I'm going to install a 20 amp fuse in the top slot, like this. If you want, you can install a fuse here, but since there's not one to begin with, I don't need to install one at the bottom. So with this configuration, the voltage will come in on the left side, it'll go through the top fuse and come out on this red wire, and I'll run this wire all the way to the back. The wire that I'm using is this 14 gauge wire. I'll be running this wire from the front fuse box all the way to the back. Now for a 20 amp circuit, you really don't want to use anything smaller than a 14 gauge. Ideally, you should use 12 to 14 gauge. With these two wires, I'm going to use a brown wire for my ground and then green wire for the positive 12 volt. So here I'm going to crimp a ring terminal to the brown wire, which is my ground. Next, I'll crimp the fuse tap onto my positive wire. Here I'm going to use some tester tape to wrap the wire. Pull back on this weather stripping. And I'll route this wire behind the panel. Now I can put the weather stripping back on. So let me show you which grounding bolt I'll use for my ground wire. Now to the right of the fuse box, you see there are two bolts up top here. Both of them are tested and they're a good ground, so you can use either bolt for your ground. And the bolt is 10 millimeter. Now I'm going to remove that 10 millimeter bolt. Here it is. Put the ring terminal behind the bolt. Now tighten the bolt. Now I can plug in my fuse tap. I'm going to remove the side step here. Now I'm going to route the wire following the factory wire loom. On the back here, remove this panel. So here I fed a long zip tie behind this panel all the way to the front. And let me show you the other side. This is the end of that zip tie, and I taped my wire to it. Now I'm going to pull this back underneath the panel. And here's the wire. I'm not going to reinstall this panel. Pull back on this weather stripping. And run this wire behind this panel. Here on the back hatch, pull back on this weather stripping. Carefully pop off this panel. Now you have access to the area behind this. Again, I'm using my long tie wrap to help fish the wire, and I fed this tie wrap up behind this panel. And let me show you where it comes out on the other side. And here's the other end of the tie wrap. Now I'll tape the wire to one end and then pull this wire through. And here's my wire. Now I can reinstall this weather stripping and reinstall this panel. Now I'll just feed the wire through this hole. Let me show you this Nissan power socket that I'll be installing. Now this one here is actually not for the 2021 and newer Nissan Rogue. This is for the previous generation, but it will fit into that factory hole that I showed you earlier. Now if you look at the end here, the connector on this end have two Spade connector. And since I don't have the factory wiring harness for it, I will crimp my own Spade connector to plug into these two terminals. Now the width of each of these terminals is 2.8 millimeter or 0.11 inch. Here I picked up a set of Spade terminals, and this comes in three sizes: 2.8 millimeter, 4.8 millimeter, and 6.3 millimeter. I will use a 2.8 millimeter one. And here's a look at one of the 2.8 millimeter female Spade connector. Taking a closer look at these two terminals, the one in the middle with the silver conductor at the bottom there, that is a positive. The one on the outside, that one's negative. So make sure you connect it properly when you install this. Now when you first try to plug this in, it can be a very tight fit. So what I recommend is get a sharp awl like this here and give a little poke to stretch the end. So open up this opening, and that'll make plugging this connector in a lot easier when you install it. Now with these type of connectors, normally you can use a crimper like this to crimp it, but because the gauge of wire I have here is very thick, I won't be able to crimp it properly. So instead I'm going to solder this onto this terminal. By the way, this is a rechargeable soldering iron. This is the best tool to use if you're doing automotive wiring. It heats up very fast and it's completely cordless. Here's a look at these two wires with the two female Spade connectors. Now I'll plug these two wires onto these two terminals. Again, the one in the middle here is the positive and the one on the outside is negative. Here's one. And both of these are now connected. I turn on the ignition. I'm going to test this out. And it has 12 volt. With the wires connected, I can push this into this hole, and there are clips around the side here that hold it in place. And here's what it looks like from behind. Now I push the panel back in. Reinstall the weather stripping. Now this 12-volt outlet is tied to my ignition, so I do need to start my car. With this connected, I can turn on the light and the compressor. Now plug in my refrigerator. It just turned on. So as you can see, it's really handy to have a 12-volt outlet at the back of the vehicle. I'm not sure why Nissan didn't include one from the factory. So if you own a Nissan Rogue and you're interested in installing a 12-volt outlet at the back of your vehicle, I hope you found this video to be helpful. For a list of parts and tools, I'll include the links in the video description below. As always, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching this video. To support this channel, remember to click on thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and turn on the notification bell so you get notified of new videos.